In just hours, over 3 Russian vehicles lay in ruins. From an armored carrier packed with more than a dozen troops to a cutting-edge T-90M tank, all crushed by Ukraine's deadly combo of Bradley vehicles and FPV drones. Shocking footage reveals a battlefield flipping in ways experts never saw coming. Russian soldiers scramble under wrecked armor for cover, only to get picked off as drones slip right underneath and explode with pinpoint fury. A T-90M blasts a Ukrainian drone team in a building, forcing survivors to flee, but as it backs away, a Bradley rolls up close and unleashes a storm of 25mm rounds straight into its front plating, sparking flames that end it all. Old tricks like hiding behind vehicles, retreating to bunkers, or holding artillery positions crumble fast against these high-speed FPVs. Drones now cause 60 to 70% of all casualties on both sides, turning the war into a nightmare of constant aerial threats. And the big question hangs heavy. What truly tips the scales of victory in Ukraine right now? If cheap drones and aging American Bradleys can dismantle Russia's latest gear, what happens next as both nations ramp up their race for more UAVs, shells, and armored might? The answer will shape the outcome of every fight that follows. The Bradley that watched the area had its cannon ready. And the moment the carrier appeared in the open, the vehicle released a stream of 25mm rounds that hit the side plates with enough force to break the formation. The Russian troops inside reacted fast because the armor on the carrier could not absorb repeated hits at close distance, and the soldiers jumped out and ran towards small patches of cover on both sides of the road. The Bradley continued firing to keep the unit pinned down, since any pause would allow the scattered soldiers to regroup, and the bursts landed close enough to stop movement across the field. The Russian troops tried to spread out to avoid being trapped near the disabled carrier, yet each group remained exposed because there were no solid structures nearby that could block drone movement. Ukrainian operators used this moment to launch FPV units that were already circling behind the tree line, and these drones quickly locked onto heat signatures and dust trails kicked up by the fleeing soldiers. Each FPV approached low to the ground to avoid Russian spotters who were still trying to orient themselves. And the drones struck the first group hiding near a dirt ridge. The shock from the blast forced the remaining troops to change direction, but another drone followed their route and detonated near the second cluster of soldiers. The armored carrier caught fire as ammunition inside began to heat up from the earlier hits, and the flames grew until the wreck turned into a burning marker in the middle of the field. This sequence showed how thin armor on Russian carriers becomes a major problem when a Bushmaster cannon fires at high speed. And this weakness becomes even more dangerous when drones hunt anyone who escapes. The Russian soldiers on the far side of the road attempted to crawl toward a shallow ditch, yet the Bradley moved slightly forward to maintain a direct angle on the area, and this movement kept them within the strike zone. The FPV operators monitored the shadows cast by the troops as they tried to hide, and the drones approached through narrow gaps between broken fence posts to reach the last firing points. The blasts threw dirt across the field and left no safe path for retreat, and the absence of supporting armor or electronic protection meant the Russian unit could not call in help before being overwhelmed. The burning carrier sent smoke upward that could be seen from a distance, and this plume signaled to Ukrainian troops that the first stage of the defense had succeeded. Russian APCs traditionally move infantry quickly to cover, yet this role depends on the ability to survive the initial contact, and in this confrontation the armor failed within seconds. The combination of cannon fire that stops the vehicle and drones that eliminate soldiers on foot removes the value of rushing forward with lightly protected carriers. And this shift forces Russian units to reconsider how much risk they accept when using these vehicles as the first wave. A T-90M moved toward a damaged building that Ukrainian forces had used as a drone control point, and the tank crew received orders to destroy the structure before Ukrainian operators could relocate. The T-90M fired a high explosive round that struck the front wall and sent debris across the yard, and the blast forced the Ukrainian team inside to withdraw as loose bricks and dust filled the entrance. The tank advanced a short distance to confirm that the building could no longer support drone operations, and the gunner scanned nearby windows to check for remaining movement. The T-90M then began to reverse toward its original route because the mission inside that sector was complete, and the crew prepared to leave the area before Ukrainian reinforcements arrived. The retreat path ran through open terrain that had been reshaped by earlier shelling, and the uneven ground slowed the tank enough for Ukrainian scouts to track its position. The Bradley that waited behind a low ridge stayed quiet during the strike on the building, and the crew remained inside until the tank crossed the final cluster of trees that marked the edge of the open field. When the T-90M emerged from the last tree line, the Bradley moved a short distance forward to gain a clean line of sight on the front armor, and the gunner fired the first burst from the 25mm cannon. The rounds hit the upper plates near the sensors, and small sparks appeared on the metal as the impact cut through external fittings. The T-90M attempted to rotate its turret toward the new threat, yet the movement was uneven because the earlier hits affected the ability of the turret ring to turn smoothly. The Bradley released another burst to maintain pressure, and several rounds struck the optical housing that guided the tank's aim. A small fire formed near the front deck as cables and surface panels heated from repeated impacts, and smoke began to rise around the top of the hull. The T-90M tried to back down the slope behind it to limit exposure, but the flames spread quickly because the damaged equipment at the front allowed heat to move toward the internal sections. The driver attempted to reposition the tank by turning slightly to the right, and the tracks shifted a short distance before another burst from the Bradley struck the front area again. The shock from the burst caused items inside the T-90M to jolt, and a flash appeared near the driver's compartment as stored materials ignited. The fire grew rapidly around the lower part of the hull, and the crew opened a hatch in an attempt to escape from the rising smoke. The T-90M stopped moving as the fire consumed the front section, and the bright glow inside the cabin made it clear that the tank could no longer return fire or reposition. Ukrainian infantry advanced behind the Bradley to secure the zone, while the tank continued to burn, and the soldiers checked the edges of the field for Russian troops who might have followed behind the T-90M. The Bradley maintained position near the ridge to monitor any approach routes that Russian forces could use, and the vehicle kept its cannon aimed toward the far end of the field while smoke drifted into the sky. The Ukrainian forces remained in the area until the tank was fully disabled, and the scene marked the end of the encounter as the T-90M lay destroyed in the open terrain with no backup forces arriving to recover it. A Russian artillery team started firing toward Ukrainian trenches, and the continuous blasts shook the front line as Ukrainian soldiers held their positions under heavy pressure. The Russian crew operated from a dug-in firing point that had open sight over a stretch of the battlefield, and they kept launching round after round to break any Ukrainian attempt to move forward. The rate of fire created a curtain of explosions across the soil, and dust clouds rose each time a shell struck the ridges around the trenches. Ukrainian observers used a small UAV to track the source of the fire, and the drone moved along the tree line until it reached a position above the Russian pit. The operator watched the crew reload their gun, and the drone hovered long enough to select the exact spot where ammunition boxes were stacked next to the weapon. The UAV then dropped a small munition that fell straight onto the storage area, and the first blast tore through the open crates before a wave of secondary explosions ripped across the site as the stored shells caught fire. The shock was strong enough to throw soil across the nearby positions, and the Russian crew abandoned the pit as the flames reached the gun mount. The artillery position collapsed into a burning crater while smoke rose into the air. And the remaining Russian soldiers ran towards scattered cover behind broken walls and fragments of trenchwork. Ukrainian infantry pushed forward to confirm the strike. Yet the field was still dangerous because scattered rounds could detonate without warning. The approach route had been churned by previous fire missions, and the ground shifted under each step as the troops advanced with caution through the debris. A Bradley entered the zone after the artillery pit stopped burning, and the vehicle moved along the left side of the field to shield Ukrainian troops who were trying to recover injured soldiers trapped behind an embankment. The Bradley released short bursts toward the retreat paths to prevent any Russian return, and the sound of its cannon echoed through the area as it kept suppressive fire on likely hiding spots. The armor on the Bradley allowed it to cross areas that were still hot from earlier explosions, and the crew opened the rear ramp once they reached a safe pocket near the trench line. Ukrainian soldiers carried 2 wounded fighters toward the Bradley while the vehicle covered their movement, and the ramp crew helped pull the injured men inside before checking the ground behind them for more trapped teammates. The Bradley then reversed slightly to create additional protection between the rescue team and the burning Russian position, and the driver scanned the terrain for any movement that could signal a counterattack. The ability of the vehicle to deliver fire and provide medical extraction at the same time became critical in this moment, and the crew remained focused on keeping the area secure long enough to stabilize the wounded. Once the injured troops were inside, the Bradley pushed forward again to pick up another group that had taken cover inside a shallow ditch. The vehicle carried the wounded to a safer line behind a row of broken trees, and the medical team inside began treating them as soon as the ramp closed. The final view of the area showed the Russian artillery site reduced to charred metal and cratered earth, and the Ukrainian forces held the ground while preparing for the next push. The next assault group, made up of Azov fighters and European volunteers, gathered at a staging point, and the preparation process showed how much coordination was required for a single push across open terrain. The soldiers checked rifles, adjusted protective gear, and applied blue tape on their arms to prevent friendly fire as the unit would move through multiple tree lines where visibility changed quickly. Medical kits were reviewed by each team member because the commanders expected close contact with Russian forces, and the group moved toward transport vehicles once gear checks were complete. The order to advance came as Ukrainian drones confirmed a gap in Russian observation posts, and the assault group dismounted near a cluster of trees that provided early cover. The commander reminded every fighter that survival depended on movement, and he stressed that stopping for even a short moment could expose them to artillery correction, or FPV hunters. The unit spread out in a loose formation that allowed them to move between bushes, broken fences, and small patches of forest while maintaining steady fire toward suspected Russian positions. European operators monitoring the sky from a separate location kept their UAVs above the field to watch Russian trenches, and the live feed showed shifting shadows that suggested Russian troops had begun to move after hearing the first bursts of rifle fire. The information reached the assault group in seconds, and the commander shifted the left wing of his line to intercept any escape route that might open as the Russian position weakened. The shifting formation allowed Azov fighters to press forward, while European volunteers from the support element covered distant angles to limit movement from Russian scouts. 2 Russian soldiers realized their location had been exposed when the first rounds hit the front of their shelter, and they abandoned their position to run toward a shallow path behind a dirt mound. The Ukrainian assault group continued advancing while firing short bursts to keep pressure on the retreating troops, and the drone operators followed the fleeing soldiers by tracking their movement through dust patterns along the ground. The 2 Russians reached the entrance of an old bunker and tried to descend into it before the advancing unit closed the distance. The Ukrainian commander ordered a grenade thrown into the bunker entrance to force them out, and the explosion inside pushed both soldiers back into the open where the assault line regained sight. 2 other Russian soldiers attempted to run again, but the field was too exposed and the advancing unit closed the gap, until both soldiers were forced to abandon the escape route. The unit pushed deeper into the Russian-held zone by clearing each trench section with short exchanges of fire, and the combined force secured the area once the last Russian rifleman disappeared beyond the far embankment. The commander ordered the group to fall back toward the pickup point because FPV drones often circled disputed territory minutes after control shifted, and the soldiers gathered near their armored carrier without lowering their guard. The APC moved forward to pick them up from behind a line of broken trees, and the soldiers boarded one by one while scanning the sky for any small object that could indicate an incoming drone. The drone operators monitored the area during the retreat to ensure that no FPV ventured close to the carrier, and the vehicle continued moving until it reached a safer zone behind several natural ridges. The last stage of the fighting became clear when a Ukrainian drone recorded several Russian soldiers hiding under an abandoned tank, and the group believed the heavy hull above them could stop any attack from the air. The field was covered in broken metal from earlier strikes, and the quiet around the wreck made the soldiers think the danger had passed. The men stayed close to the tracks while trying to adjust their positions, yet every movement they made created small pulses of dust that the drone above could detect. A FPV approached by flying low along the soil until it reached the dark space under the hull, and the blast blew apart the underside of the vehicle. Another scene caught a drone arrived near a tank and entered the same narrow gap, and the explosion shook the dirt under the tank as the Russian soldiers tried to shift again to avoid the pressure. One man attempted to fire upward with his rifle, but the angle under the hull gave him no clear line to hit the drone as it moved close to the ground. Another clip showed a FPV coming from the sky, while a soldier grabbed branches and pieces of debris to block the approach path. But the drone still slipped through when he couldn't cover in time. One soldier tried to escape by running toward a shallow trench several meters away, and the drone unit tracking the movement sent another FPV after him. The device followed the trail of dust behind him and struck before he reached the trench line. The last Russian soldier chased a tank still running and tried to climb onto the hull to avoid detection. Yet the drone operators watched the shifting shadow until he became visible. The final FPV entered the space and detonated close to his position, and the smoke that drifted upward showed that no movement remained under the abandoned tank. Ukrainian infantry advanced once the drone team confirmed the area was clear, and the soldiers moved slowly across the field to check for any hidden traps around the wreck. The field still smelled of smoke from the repeated blasts, and the Ukrainian soldiers continued searching until every body had been checked for equipment that could reveal Russian routes or positions. The destroyed tank stood in the center of the clearing while the team gathered the final items and prepared to leave. Nearby, another Ukrainian group escorted Russian prisoners who had surrendered earlier, and the prisoners were guided toward an underground shelter to avoid any FPV that might still be circling overhead. The escort team entered first to make sure the passage was safe, and the prisoners followed while Ukrainian troops watched the sky for new drone movement. With the zone secure, the Ukrainian unit prepared to withdraw, because remaining in place increased the danger of incoming strikes. The soldiers boarded an armored carrier that waited behind a row of trees, and the vehicle moved along a covered path that avoided open ground, with the drone operators stayed active to ensure no threat approached from behind. The full picture of these clashes shows a battlefield that is changing faster than many expected, and the main force shaping it is no longer heavy armor but speed, precision, and timing. Russian vehicles that once carried entire squads were stopped in seconds by 25mm fire and low-cost FPV drones. And even a T-90M that completed its strike mission could not survive a close encounter with a Bradley positioned at the right moment. Artillery sites that once dominated open ground collapsed under a single guided drop, and infantry units advanced only because drones cleared every hiding place before they moved forward. Both sides continue to take losses, yet both continue to push because the tempo itself has become part of the strategy. One relies on mass and constant pressure, while the other leans on Western vehicles, smart munitions, and flexible units that change direction as soon as the drones point to a new threat. The question now is what comes next as cheap FPV drones multiply, and armored vehicles struggle to stay ahead of every camera in the sky. Will the next stage favor the side with more UAVs, or the side that links technology, ground tactics, and timing in the most efficient way? If you want more clear frontline breakdowns and straight political military analysis, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Military Force.